Hello everyone, welcome to Byju's classes. Prelims is over and hopefully you would have done very well in the exams. In this lecture, we shall be discussing about your prelims exam. We shall be looking at all the questions that have come in the exam, and we shall look at what sort of questions, what sort of turn UPSC has taken in this particular exam this year. As far as this lecture is concerned, we have broken it into 4 lectures or 4 parts. In the first part, I shall be covering your all the questions of history and international relations. In the other 3 parts, we shall be covering polity. In another part, economy and the government schemes. And in the last part, we shall also be covering geography, science and technology, and environment and biodiversity. Before entering into the questions, let us look at the pattern of the questions this year. Now, if you look at this particular pie chart, very clearly this year the area which had the maximum number of questions was history. Within history, of course, these areas were modern, medieval, ancient, as well as art and culture. But then there were 2 questions which were from postmodern also, which for our sake we'll be including in our modern discussion only. Apart from this, you can see a major area is economics. This year, these 2 portions saw a huge increase as far as the number of questions that came. Third area is your environment and polity, both having 13 questions each. Polity last year, if you remember, had 22 questions. This year, the number of questions in polity has decreased to some extent. Another area which has seen a lot of questions this year is the international relations area. And you will see most of the questions that have come in this area have been dynamic in nature, that is, have come from the current affairs section. Other 2 areas, you can see science and technology having 10 questions, and your geography last year 9, this year 10. But then you all can understand a lot of questions of geography keep on overlapping with your environment and ecology. Lastly, this year the government schemes have been reduced as far as the number of questions are concerned. Only 4 questions coming from this area. Now, continuing the trend of where UPSC has started to ask a lot of questions from your dynamic areas, that is your current affairs, this year also was no exception to that. If you look at this year, 50% of the questions were static, but then 50% of the questions were also having current affairs and some questions which had both static as well as dynamic quotient. If you look overall, 35 questions were totally from current affairs section, and 15 questions were those which had both the static as well as dynamic quotient. If we break this whole number subject wise, what do we get is, if you look at here, one subject, that is history, had all the questions barring one in static area, and that one question which is there both in static as well as dynamic was mainly because it was in news recently. In the other areas, you can see polity is another area where the majority of the questions, that is 9, is from static areas. Similarly, economics is one area where 9 questions are coming from static areas, that is half of the questions keeping up the trend is coming from the static areas. Rest of the questions you can see having a good mixture of both the dynamic as well as your current affairs. If you look at IR, this is one area where there is no static question. Continuing the trend, all the 10 questions are either totally current affairs or the mixture of questions of both static and dynamic content. Government schemes also totally a current affairs section. Whereas science and tech, you can see 10 questions, 5 completely current affairs based, and 5 had certain statements which were static, 5 others were dynamic in nature. Last year also we had predicted our prelims cutoff, and if you go to our last year's lecture, which is of whose link is mentioned, and if you look at this particular time frame which is being given here, you would find out that we had last year predicted the cutoff to be 105 to 108, and the cutoff last year came out to be 105.34 according to UPSC cutoff. So we were bang on the cutoff. This year, Byju's IAS is predicting the cutoff to be in the range of between 100 to 104, and this is something that we are predicting for this year. Now let us enter into the discussion of this question paper. For the purpose of discussion, we have taken your set B, as you can see, in which your first question is from your modern history. Now, this year, the questions of modern history, as you can see, the first question is question number 1 in set B, is coming from your education chapter. And fortunately or unfortunately, 3 questions came from this particular area. The question number 1, according to us, we have already explained all the questions of history barring one is static. So I'll not be repeating that again. But this question is easy. It's an easy question for the simple reason, Charter Act of 1813. So the question is, which of the following led to the introduction of English education in India? Now, we all know Charter Act of 1813 is the charter which had given 1 lakh of rupees, where that money was to be utilized for the promotion of education and the knowledge of modern sciences in India. This was to encourage modern education, which included English. So once the moment 1 is correct, this is incorrect. Now, the thing was, people would be knowing about this third point, the Orientalist and the Anglicist controversy. Now, we all know people who wanted the promotion of education in India through the medium of classical languages like Sanskrit, Persian or Arabic are known as the Orientalists, the Eastern culture supporters. And those who wanted English or the Western education in the medium English, they were known as the Anglicists. This controversy was finally settled during the times of Bentinck. So this also led to the introduction of English language. So your statement 3 is also correct. So now you have to know about statement 2, and this is the only tricky statement here because of the fact that this, if they would have used a word called Macaulay Minutes, which is a famous statement given by Thomas Babington Macaulay, who was the chairperson of this particular committee, the General Committee of Public Instruction, formed in 1823 by Lord William Bentinck. So the only thing is, whether the people knew that the Macaulay Minutes was also known as General Committee of Public Instruction or not is the tougher aspect of this question. If they knew about this, it was a very straightforward, easy question. This is your question number 1. Now here I'm going to discuss 2 other questions of education chapter only, and that's why in the set B only I'm moving to your question number 14. Now, this particular question is again a static question, and from my perspective it is easy, but then there was again one point of tricky thing here. If you look, Sanskrit College at Benares, William Jones very clearly was wrong statement because it was started by Jonathan Duncan. For that matter, William Jones had started Asiatic Society of Bengal. So that was very clear that A and C is wrong, and now people had to only know which of the following 2 statements are correct. And if you look, everybody knows that Calcutta Madrasa was started by Warren Hastings. At the same time, people also knew that Fort William College was started by Lord Wellesley. The only thing here was, people may have got confused after looking at Arthur Wellesley. The answer here is, this is wrong because it was not Arthur Wellesley but Richard Wellesley who had started your Fort William College. So now the moment you are sure that Warren Hastings is correct, you should have removed this option. Your answer would have been B. Let us look at the third question of education chapter, which is question number 89 in this set. Now if you look at this particular question, it is Wood's Dispatch. Now, we all know this is the Magna Carta of British education, the English education in India. It came in the year 1854 during the times of Lord Dalhousie. Now, in this particular question, basically they have asked you some of the points which are mentioned in this educational dispatch of 1854, commonly known as Wood's Dispatch, on the name of Mr. Charles Wood, who was the first Secretary of State of India. Now, if you look at the 3 things, grants in aid system was introduced. Of course, it was correct. They were introducing the things that we should get the money. If you look at point number 2, establishment of universities was recommended. Of course, it was correct. And based on the recommendation of this committee, we had Calcutta, Bombay, Madras University, all the 3 in 1857. And later we also had universities like places in Punjab, Allahabad, etc. So that means 2 is also correct. So basically, the moment 1 is correct, this is wrong. The moment 2 is correct, this is wrong. Now we have to think about 3. English as a medium of instruction at all levels of education was recommended. Now the problem is, this is a wrong statement because of the fact that this particular dispatch had rejected the earlier advanced filtration theory, was laying emphasis on mass education, was talking about improvement of vernacular languages. So this is a wrong statement. Answer is 1 only. Now let us look at question number 85 of this set. Overall, a static question, and from my viewpoint, it is a question which is moderately difficult, not very easy, not very tough, because of the fact that very clearly subsidiary alliance who has proposed Lord Wellesley, and they are asking what doesn't apply. If you all know, this system was brought by Lord Wellesley, who had come to India as a viceroy in the year 1798, remained here till 1805. The whole idea here was to make the Indian princely states accept the paramountcy of the Britishers. So option D is a correct statement about this particular subsidiary alliance. The first state signing this was your Nizam of Hyderabad, and later many other states like Awadh, Mysore, etc. had signed it. Now, we all know that in this, one of the most important provisions of this thing was that the states like these had to maintain the British forces, and these British forces would be paid from the treasuries of these states. So your point A is also correct. Here only now the option B and C may have been confusing somebody, because I'll take C here. To secure a fixed income for the company. Now we all know through subsidiary alliance a lot of money was made by the Britishers, but then there was no point here to secure a fixed income as such, though they got a lot of money. What we can look here is they wanted to keep India safe from Napoleonic danger. We all know, because in 1798 your Tipu Sultan is in talks with Napoleon, and even before they could come, the French could come to help him. In 1799, the 4th Anglo-Mysore was fought, and Mysore was defeated, Tipu was killed, and later the Wudiyar dynasty was brought here, and they had signed your subsidiary alliance. So the correct statement, the correct answer, the answer that is which doesn't apply to this system is your option C, that is they were not going to secure any fixed income as far as your company was concerned. Let us look at the question 78 of this set. Now if you look at this particular question, again, see, one common theme that you can look is 3 questions on education, then 1 question on subsidiary alliance, another question on English East India Company, and all these questions have come from the region which we call that even our Indian national movement. They are not covering Indian national movement, though they are in the your modern history, but they are not coming into this zone as of now. Your 5th question from untraditional areas which we call. Now, what did these Britishers export from India? Now, if you look at these 4, now we know from Bengal has to be seen. Now, as far as Bengal is concerned, this question is overall a static and a moderately difficult question, because we know they were not exporting zinc or lead from this area. At the same time, Britishers were also not exporting neither the gold nor the silver nor the copper. So you're basically these 2 options were negated. Now you have to look at this option A and option D, where opium is common in both of them. Now we all know Bengal in those days was famous for the clothes which it used to prepare, the famous silk and the cotton or the muslin clothes which were exported all over the country. And if you look here, it's being mentioned as raw cotton. At this place it is being mentioned cotton. At the same time, saltpeter, which had already come, if you all remember this particular word, saltpeter has already come in 2015 prelims also. So there also this had come in one of the questions, that which of the following things is being imported by India for steel industry. Now we all know all these things were being exported by India in those days. From which place? From Bengal. At the same time, here you can see it's being mentioned raw cotton. Look at the century which they are calling 18th century, that is to 1700 to 1799, and in this century your industrial revolution though has begun in 1750. In India, this is the first phase of capitalism only going on. Your second phase hasn't begun. So more was demand of cotton, and there was not much for the oilseeds, especially from Bengal. So the answer here would be D. Look, there is another question from economic history of modern India. That is one question we saw just now, and there is another question. That's question number 22 of this set. And this question is slightly tricky question for the fact that you have to understand, this time they are calling 19th century, 1800 onwards till 1899. So did that lead to increase in the export of Indian handicrafts? No. The thing is, it led to the decrease. British rule, they did not want our handicraft industry or our handicrafts to reach your European market, because then their goods which would have been made in Manchester would have suffered. So overall our handicraft industry had decreased as far as the exports were concerned. If you look, growth in the number of Indian owned factories, there were definitely some factories which were opened, but then the thing is, did it grow? No. Only a few British and a few Indians, capitalists, were allowed to start a few factories here or there, which we see in the second half of the 19th century, that is post 1850s. But then overall there is not such a huge growth. If you look at option D, rapid increase in the urban population, this is a totally incorrect statement, because your NCERT specifically talks that this period was known for the loss of your urban industries, and it led to a huge decline in the population of urban areas. So this is a wrong thing. Overall, the correct statement is commercialization of Indian agriculture, which we know at this period what happened is the Indian agriculture started to do the commercial agriculture on a very large scale. That is, intensity or the magnitude of our agriculture in commercial side had increased. Many new things like indigo, cotton, everything were being grown at this point. So the answer would be C. Let us look at the question 21 of this set. According to me, this is a tough question, because most of the times what we study about the Santhal uprising, also famously known as the Hull uprising, that happened in the year 1855, before your 1857 revolt, is who were the prominent leaders and all. What is being asked here is that what all happened within the Santhal uprising. So it is going a bit deeper. The first thing is the territories called Santhal Parganas were created. Now this is a correct statement, because of the fact that Britishers in that era, to solve this problem, had started this new areas being created. This particular area of Santhal Parganas were removed or separated from the district of Bhagalpur, modern day Bihar, and Birbhum district, and this new area was formed. Later on, this was done in many other uprisings. Whenever such uprisings would take place, the Britishers would form such core areas for those tribals, like Garo Hills were created or Jaintia Hills were created, and such the Scheduled Districts Act of 1874 was created. So overall, correct. If you look at the second point, it became illegal for a Santhal to transfer land to a non-Santhal. Now we all know one of the reasons for this Santhal rebellion was the different type of land tenure system which had been enacted during the colonial era. And under this, what was done was to protect the land of the Santhal or the Adivasi. It was made that Adivasis couldn't sell their land to the non-Adivasis, that is non-Santhals, or at times also known as the word Dikus, that is outsiders. The whole idea being, if they will not be selling this land, their land would be protected and these people would not have the uprisings. Now this is a question which I think is a tough question. The answer was both C, that is both 1 and 2. This had come in one of the Yojana's article. But then not this year, around 2 years ago, this particular topic had come in one of the magazines, in one of the articles of Yojana. Apart from that, this was lot in news because of the protests that had broken in Jharkhand over the new land tenancy laws last year. So this was a bit in news, the land laws and everything. So but still who studies in so depth with regards to every small uprisings of each and every place. So overall, a tough question about your Santal Pargana Tennessee Act or your Santal uprising. Tough. Now, look at the fifth question of this set. Now, this is the last question, which is basically coming from the non-traditional areas. Why I am calling this also a non-traditional area? Because you can see the first point is socio-religious reforms topic. The second point is either you talk about this under the agricultural revolts or the uprisings, or you can talk this under the chapter press. The third, again, press and the books, the journals which were brought out. And last is your under the topic of civil services. So what they did is basically they have taken some 4 different topics, and then they have asked you to arrange in order, in the sense that tell me which happened the first. Now, if you look at this, we know this one happened in 1875. Swami Dayanand Saraswati, original name Mool Shankar, had formed your Arya Samaj. If you look, Neel Darpan, now we all know this particular book was written during Indigo Revolt, and this revolt had happened just after your 1857, around 1859. If you look at the third one, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, he is writing your Anand Mat. Which year it was written? It was written in the year 1882. And finally, you have S.N. Tagore, the brother of Rabindranath Tagore, who goes on to become the first Indian to succeed in Indian civil services examination. It happens in the year 1863, after the reforms of civil services were performed in the preceding years. Now, the answer to this question, as you can see, is B. But then also I will put this question into a tough category, because barring A, B and D, which people may be knowing, the C point, that remembering the year in which this particular book was written, is a tough proposition. And I don't know how many of the people would be knowing this. Similarly, because it's very easy to say these things afterwards, but in the examination hall, exactly remembering when was it written, or in the examination hall remembering exactly which year it was done. So this is also a question which was tough. Question number 4. Personally, I found this question to be a very tough question, for the simple reason that this particular name is not written in any of your books which we usually consult for our UPSC. This is not mentioned in the NCRTs of both the Bipin Chandras, not mentioned in your Spectrum, not mentioned into your Grovers, not mentioned into your Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, not mentioned in Sumit Sarkar. You take the names and all the prominent books have not mentioned this. So which body was exactly Swarajya Sabha? Now if you look, they have given you 4 options: All India Home Rule League, Hindu Mahasabha, South Indian Liberal Federation, the Servants of India Society. And if you look, all these bodies are pre-1920, that is Home Rule League, the 2 leagues started by Tilak and Annie Besant both around 1916, Hindu Mahasabha around 1915, South Indian Liberal Federation, which later on goes on to become your Justice Party around 1917, and Servants of India Society started by Gokhale. All these are pre-1920. So in the examination hall, it is not that easy to remember that which of the following had a change in name. And because most of the people may not have studied this, because it's not in any of the mainstream books, so it is a tough question. The answer is A, All India Home Rule League. If anybody had to make any guesses, I would presume they would have very easily forgotten this. They would have kept Hindu Mahasabha apart, because this is the same thing which has continued. And then the confusion would have been even on Home Rule League, because we keep on studying Home Rule League as Home Rule Leagues only. So only thing is, people may have got confused with this particular body, which they may not have been knowing is the name which Justice Party had. Or they may have thought about Servants of India Society, mainly thinking that by this time Gokhale would have died and maybe somebody would have changed the name of this. That's why I am again calling this to be one of the toughest question of this particular paper. Answer being A. Question number 51 of this set. Now this is depending upon the thinking in the examination hall, a tough or a moderate level question. The first part, who wrote the biographies of Mazzini, Garibaldi, Shivaji and Sri Krishna? Second part, who stayed in America for some time? And the third part was also elected to Central Assembly. And the four options are these. Now, we all know that those who would have studied your boycott and Swadeshi would have studied that after your Congress got split in 1907, Tilak was sent abroad, was sent to Burma. Bipin Chandra Pal and Aurobindo Ghosh had retired from active politics. Lalaji was the person on which a case was filed, for which he had to go to Britain and later he went to US. Apart from this, if you cannot remember this, that Lalaji had gone to US, you could have known Lalaji had gone to US because he was there in US during the times of Gadar also. If you couldn't pick this thing from here, we all know who was the member of Central Assembly. Out of these four, it was Lalaji or Motilal Nehru. But then Motilal Nehru was somebody who was not somebody who had stayed in America for a very long period of time and basically was never much into the Hindu gods and goddesses, and was never seen as a Hindu nationalist. And whereas Lalaji was seen as a Hindu nationalist who was a person who talked about Hindu traditions. Now lastly, one more question. You can see question 63 of this set. Now it is saying, in the federation established by Government of India Act 1835, residuary powers were given to whom? Now we all know that there were concurrent powers, there were state powers, there was union list, and all this. And who was given the residuary powers? Now those who would have studied GOI Act 1935 properly would be knowing it was given to the Viceroy of those days or the Governor General. That's so the answer of this question is your B. Question 79 of the same set. Now, I kept on saying Champaran Satyagraha. 100 years of this we have celebrated. Last year also a part of question was based on Champaran, and again it has come. And this question is moderately difficult because if you look at all these four, some parts may be correct. But the first thing that I'll remove here is option B. Active involvement of Dalit and tribal communities. Now, overall, the areas of Champaran don't have a lot of tribal communities. In fact, there aren't many. So this is a wrong option. If you look at another option that I'll be removing here, active all India participation of lawyers, students, women in the national movement. But then we know there was no such thing as, after this that women came in huge numbers. They will come after your non-cooperation. As far as the lawyers are concerned, some of the lawyers did join, but then they were not actively at a very all India level participating at this point of time. Major confusion would have been amongst these two. Why? Because definitely it is one of the first peasant unrest as far as your India's national movement is concerned. That is, before this, all the peasant uprisings like your Indigo uprising, your Pabna uprising, your uprisings of Deccan riots, all these were localized. But this particular peasant unrest led to Kheda. Very soon, there was another Kheda uprising. Then in 1920, we had the Eka movement, we had Mopla uprising, and now from here onwards, we are seeing peasants would have joined the India's national movement. But at the same time, D option would also have confused many people, mainly on the fact that it led to decrease in the cultivation of plantation crops and commercial crops. We do know indigo movement was done to protest the cultivation of indigo which was being forced upon the peasants of that era. But then if you remember, this is not talking about one crop, plantation or commercial, that is indigo. It is talking about all the plantation and all the commercial crops. So there was no sudden decline in the crops cultivation of other types. Only indigo declined, and that was also because of the fact that German synthetic dye had been discovered and the planters knew that their days were numbered as far as the indigo cultivation in country is concerned. So these were the 12 questions that came from your modern history. If you look, the 12 questions mainly were coming from the non-traditional areas this time. Only 4 or 5 were coming from the areas which are towards your Indian national movement. Overall, a paper, as far as modern is concerned, people who would have studied properly could have got some answers here. But then this year there were 2 more questions which were slightly modern, or if somebody wants to specify them, it can be a postmodern question. That is, first is Hind Mazdoor Sabha, question 80 of this set. which year is being it formed? In 1948. So if somebody wants to take it in modern, they can talk about the trade unionism and they can talk about this particular thing. At the same time, because it was formed in 1948, that is post 1947, so people can call it to be a postmodern question also. Overall, personally, I thought this was a very tough question. That is, who were the founders of Hind Mazdoor Sabha? The toughness of the question is mainly attributed to the fact that there are many different organizations, the trade unions which would have formed. And here you have to know, though there were some very prominent names, like you can see EMS Namboodiripad, the communist leader, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, the leader from your Jansangh, then M.N. Roy, the communist leader, K. Kamraj, the great Congress leader. You have other names like Ashok Mehta, G.G. Mehta, and all these socialists are mentioned. Overall, you can see JP is being mentioned. So this I personally thought was a tough question. Only the people who might be knowing would have attempted this question. Otherwise, most of the people would have left, because it is tough for us to remember who all would be the founders of every different organization. And if you look, the answer to this question is D, but one of the toughest question of your modern. Lastly, one more question which I'm putting in postmodern, or some may call as modern, is consider the following events. When did it happen? Now, in this 4, point number 2 is part of your economics. Point number 4 is the area which becomes the most easiest. That is, this happened in 1961. Now, this way, the formation of this question, the answer to this question would have been, if you know about 4, you would have written about the year in which Goa, Daman, Diu, the Portuguese rule had ended and they joined India. After this, you had to look into this particular first option. That is, which was the first democratically elected communist party? We all know it happened somewhere in 1950s in Kerala. So even if I don't know which prominent year it was, I know it happened before 4th. So 1 will always precede 4 very clearly. Either B or D is going to be the answer. That means 3 is always going to be the first thing to happen. Which is 3? Air India. Because this happened in around 1953. Now here, only thing that's left is very clearly 4 is at the last. So we have to think 1 or 2, that is 2-1 or 1-2. Which are these two statements? Now here your knowledge about economics would have come to picture. Do you know that this body, that is your SBI, when did it become SBI from the name change of Imperial Bank of India? So it happened in 1955. So now, when is your Kerala's government being formed? We all know it was formed around 1957. So overall, which would be the answer? 1955 is going to be 2 earlier than 1. So the answer would be B. So 2 questions which can be put as a postmodern question. Question 31 of this particular set. So these were the 14 questions of your modern history. 2 postmodern, 12 totally modern. Let us move to your ancient. Now, ancient, question 81. Now, this is an easy or a tough question depending whether you knew this or not. If you knew that this is a part of Shwetambar Jainism, it's a very easy question, because it was a sect which was formed in the 17th century, mid 17th century, around 1650s. This body was formed which believed idol worship is not needed. So the whole idea of this question is, if you knew about this thing, it's an easy question. If you didn't know, all these 4 options were going to be similar for you. Now again, another question of ancient is your question number 84 of the B set. Now again, I'll be calling it to be an easy or a tough question based on your knowledge. The answer to this is Maitreya. Now Maitreya is what? He is a bodhisattva, which according to the Buddhist traditions will appear in which era? In the future, when will achieve the complete enlightenment and will teach your pure dharma. So overall, there were only 2 questions from ancient India, and both the questions, depending upon your knowledge, would have been easy or tough. But then I would call one of them to be easy, another one it's pure luck. But then the same was not the case with medieval history, because in medieval history, the question number 83, the only one question that came from medieval is the question, who amongst the following foreign travelers elaborately discussed about the diamonds and the diamond mines of India? In the last 2 days of interaction of mine with the different students who have given the exam, Hardly anybody has written about this, because the first thing you had to know whether these 4 people were the foreign travelers to India or not. And then you had to know whether they wrote about the diamond and the diamond mines or not. And we know Bernier was a traveler, Tavernier was a traveler, and the answer to this question is your option B, Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, who had definitely traveled to India to write, who was a merchant and had written about the diamonds and the diamond mines of India. So let us now move to the questions of your art and culture. In art and culture, let us look at the first question, that is question number 24 of this set. On this side, the crafts are mentioned. On this side, the state to which this belongs. This is the only topic of your modern history or your total history which we have put under your area, which is both static plus dynamic. The reason for this is all these 3 have been granted your geographical indications. All these have been granted your GI tag. Now, the thing was why I'm also putting it into dynamic is also the reason, because the second one, the Sujni embroidery, was also covered in one of the recent articles of your Hindu. Now, Sujni embroidery, it depends upon these types of questions, depend if you are from those states, have you ever heard about these or not, and that way you can decide about these, that way you can decide about that whether you know these questions or not. For example, Sujni embroidery is not from Maharashtra, it is from Bihar. It is a distant cousin, if I say it like this, of the Madhubani painting, but then it is closer to Bengal's Kantha work. So the moment your 2 is wrong, you have to think about either these 2. And those who would have studied about your Todas, the people who are the original inhabitants and in the Nilgiris in Tamil Nadu who are there, and if you would have seen their picture, this particular lady, the dress that she is wearing, you can see these shawls are known as your Puthukuli shawls, which are very famous. So this is definitely a heritage of your Tamil Nadu. And we all know Upada Jamdani saris do not belong to your Karnataka area. Most of the times the Sujni embroideries, which is in Muzaffarpur district of Bihar, they cover these areas on your and bed sheets, curtains and all other such apparels. Ubda Jamdani is basically from East Godavari district of Andhra, and this also has got the geographical indication. And lastly, apart from this, your Puthukali shawls, which also has got your GI tag. So these are the 3 different. Now overall, this is a tough question, mainly if it could have been easy based on the fact that if you belong to any of these regions, you would have been knowing a bit. Otherwise, it's overall a tough question. Now this is one of the easiest questions of art and culture this year, Bunny Thani. Now we all must have seen this particular picture of this lady with elegance and grace. This painting developed in the Kishangarh school of Marwar, and this is one of the most easiest question that came in this year's art and culture. So overall, I'll call it to be easy, and the answer to this is your Kishangarh school. Let us look at the question 69 of this set. Now this is again regarding your cultural history about your Tyagraj Kritis, and which are the devotional songs in the praise of Lord Krishna. Tyagraj created several new ragas. Annamacharya and Tyagraj are contemporaries. Annamacharya Kirtanas are devotional songs in praise of Lord Venkateshwara. Now again, I personally felt it's a tough question of this year. The easiest thing to get to the answer here was if you knew that this is an incorrect statement, because these people are nowhere contemporaries, nowhere they are close also, in the sense that the years in which they worked was different, was totally different. That's why the moment you knew 3 is wrong, the only answer was B. So only thing this to make this answer easier was to know that 3rd point is wrong, and for that you needed to know about Annamacharya and Tyagraj, and if you knew about them you could have gone to this particular answer. Overall, a tough question. There is no denying that. Now another question with reference to the cultural history of India, consider the following statements. Now if you look at question number 82 of art and culture. Now this is a tough question mainly on account of your point number 2. Now because who studies about Bara Imam Bara and Rumi Darwaza at Lucknow with such a detail? If we look at the first statement, it is talking about Fatehpur Sikri, and now here they are talking about white marble being used in Buland Darwaza and Khanka at Fatehpur Sikri. Now, whatever pictures, if you would have recalled in the examination hall, there you may not have remembered white marble, but then in small amount white marble was definitely used here. So one statement was definitely correct. But if you look at the second statement, where red sandstone and marble used in these places, now the answer here is no. Why it was that the case? Because this time the finances of these places was not of that good quality and they were short of money, and that's why they couldn't have afforded your marble. That is the reason your only statement A is correct, but then I would call this also as a tough question of this year. Let us look at the last question of this section, question number 92. Now this is a question of moderate difficulty, because moment I saw Thangta dance in Sikkim, I knew it is wrong because we know it is in Manipur. So this is a traditional ancient art of Manipur state which symbolizes the war dances. So moment 3 is wrong, that means 1 is always going to be correct. And now you only had to know whether Kongjom Parba Balad was known in Manipur or not. And now if you would have studied this and known it, then you know that this is a ballad in which the people use drums to sing songs depicting the stories of the heroic battles that the Manipuris had fought in the late 1890s against the then Britishers. So this is a question which also is from your modern history as well as your art and culture. So overall, if you look, there were 22 questions of history. Many of them were tough, but then a lot of them were requiring a good in-depth knowledge of the subject. If you had them, you would have got some of the answers and good amount of those answers correct. So let us now shift to the area that is international relations, which was quite in demand and quite in huge demand this year. Total 10 questions coming from them, and all the 10 being your dynamic in nature. The first question, 15th question of this set B, I'm putting it as an easy question because everybody would have heard Catalonia calling for moving away from Spain. So 1 is definitely correct. Moment 1 is correct. You know D is wrong and you know B is wrong. That means 3 is also correct. That is Mindanao is in Philippines. But then I don't have to go to point number 3 because I know Crimea is not related to Hungary, but Ukraine. We know Ukraine-Russia fight is happening over this particular area. So 2 is wrong. Only answer is C. It is the easiest question, though dynamic in nature, but then easiest question of your IR. Now another question, question number 47. Now what all India would get or any country would get if it becomes a member of NSG? It's in news because India is one of the claimant. We want to get into NSG, and because of certain neighbors of ours, we are not been able to be a member of this grouping till date. But if you look, option 2 I could have very clearly said is wrong because of the fact that one who is a member of NSG, it says automatically becomes a member of NPT, which is a totally absurd option. The moment this option you have seen, you could have cut these two. And if you look at option 1, it will have access to the latest and the most efficient nuclear technologies. Of course, it's correct. It is that once you are a member of NSG, you will get the most efficient nuclear technologies. Answer is A. I will again call it to be an easy question, mainly on account of the fact that this question's options were devised or designed in such a manner to help us get to the answer. Now the next question is your question number 54, which is asking the rule of law index is released by which of the following. Now we all know this rule of law index, this measures the rule of law performance based on 8 different factors, and I'm not going to get into the 8 factors. If you don't know, do look at this. The thing is, we had to look out of these 4 which brings out this report. Last time India was placed 66th in the 2016 report out of the 113 countries which had participated. Even though India was better than many of our neighbors in South Asia, we were 3rd out of the 6 countries, better than Pakistan, better than even China. And who brings out them? It is your World Justice Project. So if you don't know which are the 8 indicators, kindly study this. This is an important thing that you should know. Now this is easy or tough based on what whether you had studied it in your current affairs or not. Based on that, this becomes easy or tough question. Look at question number 58. In the Indian context, what would be the implication of ratifying the additional protocol, a bit older topic, with the IAEA? Now, the country automatically becomes a member of NSG. Very clearly, we haven't yet become a member of NSG, and it is not related to additional protocol, but the opposition of China. Let us look at the other point. The country will have the privilege to buy uranium from the nuclear supplier group. No, for that, you don't need the additional protocol. If you look at this, the military nuclear installations come under the inspection of IAEA. There is no talk about the military nuclear installations coming under this. So overall, the answer is A. The civilian nuclear reactors come under the IAEA safeguards. Overall, an easy question. Now, who are the free trade partners of ASEAN? This was very much in news around February, March, and this we could have known by looking at the countries. There are 5 free trade partners of ASEAN, which out of those 5, 4 are mentioned here. The only 2 which are not are Canada and USA. So if you remove 2 and 6, the answer that remains is your C. The 6 partners include Australia, China, India, Japan, New Zealand. Overall, an easy question. Anybody who would have studied about ASEAN, they would be knowing about this. Now, again, a very easy question. The question is easy because of the fact that if you look, Mosul is very much in news. Aleppo is very much in news. Aleppo definitely correct. Syria, Mosul, Palestine is wrong. It was there in Iraq. So once A is correct, that is 1 is correct, this is wrong. And if you look at further, Mazar-e-Sharif is definitely in Afghanistan. So 1 and 4, B is the answer. This is an easy question. Those who would have gone through the geography through maps which we had brought there, I had mentioned about your Mosul. In that map, we have also talked about some other things like Baikal Sea, the other seas. So there were certain questions which came from this particular area. There we have also talked about Catalonia. So all those questions, if somebody would have done in the last days the geography through maps, would have been greatly benefited from those things. So the answer, easy question, B. Let us talk about THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, sometimes seen in the news. It is what? Now you have to understand, it is an American anti-missile system. It is very much in news because of the fact that, this has been deployed in many countries. Mainly this was designed during your 1991 Gulf War, when Iraq had fired their Scud missiles. And after that, these were designed so that such missiles do not hurt them. Presently, it's deployed in different areas like UAE, Guam, but the most important being South Korea, where it keeps on coming in news, where there is a lot of talks going on between the 2 Korean countries, and one of the points of talk is about this THAAD, which is the thing, that American anti-missile system. Overall, an easy question. If somebody would have read the news, it was very much in the Indian Express also very recently. Again, a very easy question, 88. Somebody who would have studied the geography through maps, there we have talked about one of the countries, that is Yemen. The easy question of this exam. It is being talked that 2 countries, as you can see, two options are given, is suffering from famine or malnutrition, mainly because of war or ethnic conflicts. We all know Yemen is being pounded by Saudi Arabia, and South Sudan, after being divided from Sudan, with Juba as its capital, is there. So if anybody would have studied that thing, it's an easy question. The answer was D. Again, a very easy question of this year. So much in news with regards to Jerusalem being made the capital and the shifting of the diplomatic mission of America. So it was very much in news. Israel, and the second state is Palestine. So I would call this to be an easy question. You can see a lot of questions easier have come from IR, mainly on account of them being in news. Last question. ILO's Convention 138 and 182 are related to. Now, if you have to understand, and if you had to bring them down, why would this be related to climate change? Because this is a labor organization. Why would it be mostly related to food prices and food security? The 2 most probable answers would have been A or D. And here comes whether you studied this thing in the last year's newspaper or not. Because last year, our government, the government of Mr. Narendra Modi, had ratified these two conventions of ILO, which were related to child labor, that is global commitment to end the worst form of child labor and ensure the minimum level of education to these children, which was given in that particular ratification. This was done at Geneva, and if you would have read this, it would be an easy question of this year. Overall, if you look, these were the questions from these two areas: 22 questions from history, 10 from your IR. This was all from history and international relations. In the next lecture, we shall bring the rest of the parts of the discussion. Thank you for listening to me. I hope overall it was something that was helpful to you people. For more such things, you can always subscribe to this particular Byju's IAS, where we keep on bringing the most relevant and important news which are important for UPSC. Thank you.